The ground shook so hard that the plates fell off my shelf before I even reached the door. My name is Daniel Cole, and I live alone on the edge of Colony Site 9, a small farming outpost 300 light-years from Earth. That night, the sky above my field turned orange, then white, then it split apart like paper. Something was falling, fast. I grabbed my jacket and ran outside barefoot, my heart pounding harder than the thunder rolling across the hills. A trail of fire cut across the stars and slammed into the far end of my wheat field, throwing dirt and smoke 20 feet into the air. The impact rattled my teeth. For a moment I just stood there, frozen, waiting for another explosion that never came. Then I heard it. A sound I had never heard before, half a screech, half a whimper, coming from the smoking crater at the edge of my land. It was small, it was scared, and it was suffering. I should have called the colony patrol. I should have stayed inside and waited for someone with better training and better weapons to handle whatever had just crashed into my field, but I didn't. I grabbed a flashlight and walked straight toward the smoke, because that sound tugged at something deep in my chest that I couldn't ignore. The crater was still glowing at the edges when I reached it. Twisted metal, strange and unfamiliar, lay scattered across the burnt grass. And in the middle of it, curled into a tight, shaking ball, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It had scales the color of dark emeralds, small wings pressed flat against its back, and eyes that glowed faintly like embers. It couldn't have been bigger than a large dog, but even wounded and frightened, it looked like something out of an old legend. It saw my light and tried to snarl, baring tiny, sharp teeth, but the sound that came out was weak, more of a cough than a threat. Its front leg was bent wrong. Its sides were caved in from hunger, ribs pressing against thin scales. Whatever it was, it hadn't eaten in a long time. I lowered myself to the ground slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal, hands open, no sudden movement. It flinched, but it didn't attack. It just watched me with those glowing eyes, trembling, too exhausted to fight and too proud to beg. I had half a sandwich in my jacket pocket from earlier that day. I unwrapped it and set it down a few feet away, then backed off. The creature stared at the food, then at me, then at the food again. Hunger won. It lunged forward and devoured it in 3 bites, faster than I thought something that small could move. That was the beginning of everything. Over the next few weeks, I didn't tell anyone about the creature. Maybe I should have. But something told me that if the colony authorities found it, they wouldn't be gentle. They would study it, cage it, maybe worse. So I built it a shelter behind my barn, out of scrap metal and old blankets, and I fed it whatever I could spare. Fish from the river, grain from my storage. Bits of meat when I could trade for them. At first, it barely tolerated me. It would eat, then retreat to the shadows, watching me with those glowing eyes like it expected betrayal at any moment. But animals, even strange ones from the stars, remember kindness. Slowly, the distance between us shrank. I started calling it Ash, because of the gray smoke that had surrounded it the night it fell from the sky. Ash began to follow me around the farm, limping at first, then walking, then finally flying in short, clumsy bursts that knocked over my tools and made me laugh out loud in the quiet of my own fields. Its wounds healed, its ribs disappeared beneath healthy muscle, and its eyes, once dull with pain, began to burn brighter every day, like small twin fires that never went out. There were strange things I noticed, but tried to ignore. At night, when Ash slept curled against the barn wall, the metal around it sometimes grew warm to the touch, as if heat rolled off its body in waves. Once, when a wandering scavenger drone flew too close to my property, Ash let out a roar that cracked one of my windows from 50 feet away. I told myself it was just a growing animal. I told myself it was fine. 2 months after the crash, the sky began to change again. It started with lights, faint ones, drifting high above the clouds, moving in perfect formation, unlike any aircraft the colony used. Ash noticed them before I did. It stood on its hind legs, staring upward, its whole body trembling with a mixture of fear and something that looked almost like longing. I didn't sleep that night, neither did Ash. By morning, the lights had grown closer and closer until they were no longer lights at all but massive shapes blotting out the sun. Ships, enormous ones, shaped like curling serpents of dark metal, hovering silently above my farm as if they owned the sky itself. My hands shook as I stepped outside, my heart hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The ground trembled as one of the ships descended into my field, crushing what was left of my wheat crop beneath its weight. A door opened along its side, and figures began to emerge. Tall, armored beings with scales like polished stone, eyes that glowed the same ember orange as Ash's, and wings folded neatly against broad shoulders. They moved with the calm, terrifying confidence of creatures who had never once feared anything in their lives. I stood frozen in my doorway as at least a dozen of them formed a wide half-circle around my farm. Ash pressed itself against my leg, growling low in its throat, but for the first time since I had known it, I saw something else in its eyes: recognition. One of the armored figures stepped forward, taller than the rest, with markings etched along its scales that shimmered faintly like liquid gold. Its voice, when it spoke, rumbled low and even, carrying easily across the open field. It said a name, not Ash, something older, something that sounded almost musical, layered with meaning I couldn't understand. And Ash lifted its head at the sound, ears flattening, before pressing itself even harder against me. The golden armored figure's eyes narrowed, studying me the way a predator studies something unfamiliar in its territory. Then it spoke again, this time in words I understood, though the language felt heavy and strange in the air. It said that the creature beside me was no ordinary animal. It was a hatchling of noble blood, an heir of the Draconi kingdom, lost during a diplomatic voyage that had ended in disaster months ago. Every ship in their fleet had been searching every corner of known space, believing their prince had either burned in the crash or been captured by enemies of their kingdom. Instead, they found him standing in a farmer's field, healthy, strong, and refusing to leave the side of a human who had done nothing more than share half a sandwich on a cold, terrifying night. I didn't know what to say. My mouth felt dry, my knees weak, surrounded by beings who could have ended my life without any effort at all. But when one of the warriors took a step closer, clearly intending to separate us, Ash let out a roar unlike anything I had heard before. Fire, real and blinding, burst from its small jaws, forcing the warrior to stumble back in shock. The entire field went silent. Even the golden armored leader seemed stunned, staring at the tiny hatchling defending a human with everything it had. I found my voice somewhere in the chaos, though it came out shaking. I told them I hadn't known what Ash was. I hadn't wanted anything from him. I had simply seen a hungry, wounded creature and done the only thing that made sense to me, because where I come from, you don't leave anyone starving in the dark if you can help it, no matter what they look like. The golden warrior studied me for a long, silent moment. Then, to my complete disbelief, it lowered itself down onto one knee, followed by every other warrior in the field, until all of them knelt before me in the crushed remains of my wheat crop. It explained, in that same deep, rolling voice, that among their people, there was no greater honor than what I had done. To feed a starving hatchling with nothing to gain, to protect it without knowing its worth, to earn its loyalty through kindness rather than fear, was considered one of the highest acts a soul could perform. In their history, it said, such bonds were rare, sacred, and unbreakable. I stood there in stunned silence as the leader rose and placed a clawed hand gently on my shoulder, careful not to press too hard. It told me that from that day forward, I would be recognized not as a stranger who had stumbled into their affairs, but as a guardian of their kingdom's bloodline, bound by honor to their prince, and welcomed as kin among their people. Ash pressed close against me, finally letting out a soft, happy sound instead of a growl, its glowing eyes locked on mine with something that looked a lot like gratitude. Life on Colony Site 9 was never the same after that morning. My small farm, once forgotten at the edge of civilized space, became a place visited by ambassadors and warriors from a kingdom older than most human history. My name, once known to nobody beyond a few neighboring farms, became known across the stars as the man who fed a hungry dragon, and, without meaning to, earned the loyalty of an entire kingdom. Ash grew larger every season, his wings stretching wider, his fire burning hotter. But he never stopped returning to my farm between his duties, curling up beside the barn just like he had that very first night. And whenever the golden ships passed overhead, farmers from neighboring fields would look up in wonder, not with fear, but with a strange kind of pride, knowing that somewhere down here, kindness had once again proven stronger than any weapon in the galaxy. I never set out to become anything special. I just saw something hungry and hurting, and I did what felt right. Turns out, sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.